Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to discuss the frustrations that the British had about the natives not disappearing fast enough. This is what we get from Sir Charles Eliot's book, The East Africa Protectorate. Now, Sir Charles Eliot came into East Africa, the East Africa Protectorate, the land that later on became Kenya in early 1900s. He was appointed to become the Commissioner of British East Africa. We can say he was the topmost government official in the Protectorate. But he resigned 2 years after being appointed. He served in that office from 1902 to 1904. He resigns, and then he publishes this book, and it's a very detailed book. And this book covers almost everything about the Protectorate, from the geography, the climate, the people, the economic potential of the land, and things like that. Now, there is a part in the book, and I need to point out that many people have pointed out this in the comment section of the videos that I've created out of this book. I'm still reading the book. And many people have pointed out that Sir Charles Eliot believed in eugenics. Now, and like many other high-ranking British officials and British academics, they believed in eugenics, which basically means they believed in this idea of some people are not worthy to continue existing. They can disappear, and that's good. Now, in this book, he expresses the frustration that the Europeans, the British in particular, were undergoing through simply because it didn't seem like the Africans, even though they consider them to be of very low class or of very low, we can say, existence, they were not disappearing fast enough, because that was the expectation. And I'm going to read that part where he talks about that, and it's a very interesting perspective that he had. Very racist, of course, but also very interesting. This is what he says. The relationship between the Europeans and Africans present in their extreme form the difficulties which may arise from the contact of advanced and backward races, and they are likely to form in America even more than in Africa one of the hardest problems of this century. So he says the relationship between the Africans and the Europeans was going to be maybe one of the hardest problems of the century, and he's going to explain why he thought so. And he says the case differs from other instances of such contact in two most important points. So he's trying to tell us why he thinks this is going to be a major problem, even though he understood that in history, people of different races have always come into contact. And this is what he says. The two races are too far apart to produce a successful hybrid. So the two races are too much apart that them coming together producing a hybrid race was going to be problematic. It wasn't going to work. That's according to him. And then he says, and the inferior race shows no signs of disappearing before its superiors. So he says, meanwhile, the inferior race, which is the African race, was not showing signs of disappearing, which was kind of like necessary. And he's going to make you get that point. And he says, such conditions occur elsewhere between races who are more or less on the same footing, as for instance, Europeans and Chinese. So he said, sometimes when two races meet, neither needs to disappear, and often they don't have to form a hybrid society. And he gives the example of the Europeans and the Chinese, but he says that's a very different situation because he considers Chinese to be equals to Europeans. So he sees that as a very different scenario. He continues to say, but they are probably not found united in any other case where one race is so indisputably inferior. In Australia, New Zealand, and Tasmania, the native race tends to disappear, or has disappeared altogether. In the Spanish and Portuguese parts of America, a hybrid race has been formed. So he talks about what has happened in Australia and New Zealand, where the natives basically disappeared. But he says, and in other examples he gives the South America, he says in that region a new race has been formed, a hybrid of the Europeans and the natives, the Indians, the so-called Indians. He continues to say, in North America, the Indian tends to disappear, but also, to some extent, mingles with the whites, and a strain of Indian blood is not, like Negro blood, regarded as a disgrace. So he says, when you go to North America, there is some unique aspect to this, or the native people coming into contact with the Europeans. He says in the North America, the Indians are disappearing. But at the same time, they are also forming a hybrid race to some extent. But he says that's only possible because the blood of the Indian is not considered to be a disgrace as that of a Negro. He continues to say, nearly all the races of modern Europe and Asia are the result of fusion between conquerors and conquered, and the weaker elements have been eliminated by slaughter or breeding, or by both combined. But the Africans has hitherto shown no sign, either in his own continent or in America, of yielding to either process. So he talks of these other races that have come into contact, and he says there has always been a tendency of the two races either forming a new race, a hybrid race as he calls it, or one disappears. But he says with the Africans, there is a problem. Number one, they are not intermarrying or interbreeding with the Europeans. Of course, we can tell from how he phrases his words or the words he uses that that's not desirable, but because the African blood is considered disgrace. So there is no room for that happening where there will be a new race of people like it has happened in Southern America, for example. But at the same time, he says the other option of them disappearing is not happening. And I found this part to be very interesting. And I remember it's been many years, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, I read a document that I found to be so disturbing to some extent. And I've tried to remember the title of the document or the person who wrote it. I have struggled for many years to try to remember what the document was, but it was a very old document, a document probably written in the late 19th century. Now, in that document, a conversation was recorded between two Europeans. One of the two was a writer, I think, and he recorded this conversation. And I think one of the two was a newcomer to the East African coast, to Mombasa. They were in Mombasa, I remember that. And the newcomer asked the European who had been here longer, is a British, of course, about what he thought was going to happen to this land. And the other guy tells him what is going to happen. This land is going to be a white man's land over time. And the other one asks him, so what is going to happen to the natives? And he tells him the natives will disappear over time. Because it has happened elsewhere, Australia and North America. I said, like, that's no big problem. And he said a big element or a big cause of that disappearance will be the natives themselves. And I'm going to do another video where Sir Charles Eliot discusses that that suggestion or consideration by the British of how they were going to put the native tribes in a situation where they were going to basically eliminate themselves. That's like, if that's the way I see it, and I'm going to do a video and you are going to see that. So sometimes we don't come to appreciate that we exist today as East Africans and maybe the rest of Africa, despite the wishes of some people who didn't want us to exist as a people, that we were to disappear and this land was going to be their land. And that's very evil, actually, when you think about it. But I think during that time, especially in the British high society, it was these were ideas that were entertained and they were acceptable. And that's because the people of that time did not see the Africans as humans, like completely humans. They could at least acknowledge them that they are humans to some level, but not to the level of a European. And so because of that, it was so easy for them to entertain these ideas of eugenics, ideas of some people are better off gone. Those are my random thoughts.